Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt with Tim and Brock. Our guest today is Conrad Jeffries. Conrad spent 13 years across the National Guard and the Coast Guard from 2001 to 2016. Since that point, he's come to lead the Shot at Dawn project, which is a suicide solution targeted at veterans, but using skills and information derived from active duty military. And now Conrad is an ultramarathoner. Conrad, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
So
it should be fun.
Yeah, it is going to be fun. We want to start out and talk about a little bit what led you to the military. You've got this enormous track record. What is it that brought you to joining the military? We all have a lot of stories that we can share about our time in, but one thing that sets us apart is what brings us to join and what brought us here today. So why don't you talk a little bit about your story starting off?
You know, I love where I'm from, but I just wanted out of there. I'm from a, small farm town in Idaho, American Falls, and which I love. It was a great place growing up as a kid. We had everything there you could want as far as hunting and sports and just a real small town. But, small towns, you have small dreams. And, I just felt trapped in a sense and was kind of going nowhere. So I decided to do something, and I wanted to do something no one else had really done. And that's why I was looking at the United States Coast Guard, because not many people from where I'm from even kind of really are aware of what the Coast Guard does. So, I started looking into it, and lo and behold, by just after 9/11, I was on my way to boot camp. I'd gone through MEPS just prior to 9/11 and reported to basic, I think the end of September of 2001.
So you were planning on joining prior to 9/11 actually happening. That wasn't a catalyst or anything for you.
Correct. Yeah. It was, I was just waiting to go to boot camp when it happened. I think I even got delayed a week or two for boot camp because of it. In fact, because boot camp's in Cape May, New Jersey, for the Coast Guard.
That must have been crazy. Was that scary for you? I mean, you're in MEPS, you're already planning on going into the military, which is at that point super unknown to you. So I'm assuming that you get the butterflies, the nervousness, the anxiety, just like everybody else does. And then 9/11 happens, and a couple weeks later, you're shipping out to boot camp. I mean, was that pretty weird?
I think the consensus of most of us when I got to boot camp is like, we're in the Coast Guard. What are we going to do? Right? Like, we'll be out on the beaches helping chicks and whatever. We'll be cruising the surf. But, a little ways through boot camp, there was, you could tell there was going to be a shift in what the role of the Coast Guard's mission was in the country. And we could feel it from our cadre commanders. And, there was a lot of changes coming. But, Coast Guard does have a history of, we have a Medal of Honor winner, Douglas Monroe, taking the Marines in. I actually went to a federal law enforcement school for the Coast Guard with the first guy killed in action since Vietnam, Nathan Bruckenthal. They were over there on tacklet teams. They're lead-at teams that get off on Navy ships, and they were searching for weapons on boats and stuff. And he actually got killed with 2 Navy guys. So the Coast Guard does have some combat operations and some missions like that. But for the most part, we were kind of looking at that shift into the counterterrorism role. Maybe it was real. I think like everyone in the country, there was a lot of like, what's going on?
I think you talk about being from a small town where nobody knows about the Coast Guard or maybe even the military. I think a lot of people in the military shit on the Coast Guard, and I'm not going to apologize, but any chance to take a shot at the Coast Guard today, we probably will. The junior brother, I think. But what's funny about that is I feel like most people in the Coast Guard I know have probably seen more action or done more quote unquote notable things than a lot of the other branches. So it's funny how that works out.
Well, yeah. And the cool thing with the Coast Guard is like a lot of the stuff we train for, we actually do. Like, you're going to run search and rescue and have an opportunity to do CPR. Hopefully not. But like in those situations, a lot of the stuff the Coasties do, and they're real squared away. It's a small service. And I will say that like, they're super squared away, and we're used to getting clowned. I mean, I got to my first Army unit, which was National Guard, right? And they're combat engineers, and they were all just clowning me for being a coastie. And we happened to have a PT test on the first day that I showed up at the unit, and I smoked them all there. And I was like, next time I'll wear my life jacket, boys. Slow me down a little when I run.
Oh my gosh.
But I thought that was funny that all these, you know, all these Army guys were getting beat by a sailor.
What I touched on this at the beginning of the introduction with you doing ultra marathons now, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But it sounds like you joined very physically fit, and your physical fitness was something that you took very seriously early on, and were good at. It wasn't something that you got out of the service or gained later on. Is that right?
Well, I've always been kind of an athlete. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I played baseball and, you know, motocross. I did a lot of stuff. I was jack of all trades in sports. I loved all of it. But when I joined the military, I didn't have much confidence. You know, I was short, a little bit chubby, and I got around guys that were more confident than me in the Coast Guard, and started training, like, you know, and really just kind of fell in love with the aspect of that. And it's been a real catalyst to my mental health throughout my life, you know. And there's just been, like, what I'm doing now and what you've seen since we've known each other is pretty new. I've always worked out and done stuff, and I've always been able to compete in some things, but like I've never really took it to the next level or tried that hard. And so that's what and we can get into it with the suicide stuff. Is I thought, you know, before I'm too old, I believe I have an ability to maybe bring some of this to fruition through those talents that God gave me, and through hard work, because that's what a lot of it is.
I don't have any doubt. It's you've got a really impressive track record, and one that would be envied and glorified by a lot of people, myself included. So, what? So to kind of start at the beginning there with your time in the service, what at the very beginning, how was that? Was that a big culture shock for you coming from a small town? I'm also from the small town in
Yeah.
Idaho too, so I know what that's like. Talk to us a little bit about what that was like, that change you experienced.
It was definitely a culture shock, and but looking back, the military gave me a lot of things I don't know if I would have got if I wouldn't have went. You know, like I said, the Coast Guard was small. There was nowhere to hide. Units everywhere is real small. There's some real squared away dudes in there. And you know, I started to pick up on that type of lifestyle, and which was real beneficial for me. You know, what was kind of overwhelming at first became and uncomfortable, because honestly, I was scared to death of the ocean too. And that's one of the reasons I went towards the Coast Guard, is because I could swim, but like I'm scared of sharks. I'm scared of all that stuff. And so, you know, the Coast Guard to me was something to kind of make myself uncomfortable with. And yeah, I really enjoyed my time in the Coast Guard. Looking back, you know, I got to spend some time in Astoria on a buoy tender. Kind of, we were switched into an interim Marine Security Strike Team for counterterrorism, part of the boat. We were interim team from what would later become the Marine Security Strike Teams on the active duty component of the Coast Guard for the West Coast. Got to go to a search and rescue station out in Georgia, just north of Jacksonville, Florida, which was pretty awesome. I loved living there. And like I said, my time in the Coast Guard, I was around a lot of squared away guys, and that really helped kind of my mentality, which has been broken up over the years as you go through life, right? We have these periods of for me anywhere, where things are squared away and I'll screw things up. And but like I got a lot of pillars from the Coast Guard that I lean on now that I'm older, and so it was really beneficial for me.
It's super interesting to me. It says a lot about you as a person that the main reason why you joined the Coast Guard was because it scared you. And it was kind of like a challenge for you. I remember being in Navy boot camp, and we're doing our swim qualification, and there you jump off like 20, 30, 40-foot ledge. I don't know how tall it is, but into this super big pool, and then you swim. And I remember watching all these people do it, and I've never seen more adults that could not swim. I've been swimming since I was 3 years old. I'm a pretty good swimmer, swam competitively, and that was mind blowing to me. That
Yeah.
how are you an adult and you can't swim? Two, if you can't swim, why are you in the Navy? And a lot of the guys that could not swim said the same thing. Why would you join the Navy if you can't swim? It's a challenge. I wanted to learn how to swim. The water scares me, whatever. So that says a lot about you as a person, I think, and that you're constantly looking for that challenge and overcoming a fear. So that's pretty cool. As wicked.
Yeah, and as you guys can relate to, like being from a small town, like at least out here where I'm from, we're real patriotic, and
Oh
so
yeah.
um, there's a nobility behind it that carries weight too when you make that decision. Anyone in those towns, I think, that goes to any branch of the service, I've just seen them get an overwhelming amount of support, which is awesome.
Well, and like you
Absolutely.
said, you kind of you rise to the level of the people around you, and then it feels so good to come home and get that pat on the back. And I'm assuming you came home at certain points or whatever, and everybody wants to shake your hand and everybody wants to say thank you for your service, and that feels good.
Yeah, and
That really is a boost, especially if you were kind of coming in not confident.
yeah, how post 9/11, the country was a little different for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Those
Yeah.
first 5, 6, 7 years after 9/11 was a different temperature in the country for sure on how they went about.
When you so you got out of the Coast Guard, you were out for a couple of years, right? Or a year and a half or so
Yeah,
before you
roughly.
transition. And then you joined the National Guard. Was that weird for you? Did getting out, was that kind of like a culture shock? I mean, how did that affect you? And did that kind of drive you to join the National Guard?
Yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I'd come back to Idaho, and the jobs here. I was like, what am I going to do? So I was working construction, and I was thinking about joining a police department, maybe something along those lines. And I had a couple buddies that were in the Army National Guard, and one had just gotten back from their deployment in 2004 or five, it was, and just decided, hey, I didn't really know. To be honest, at the time I joined the National Guard, I didn't know much of a difference between the active duty Army, National Guard, Army Reserve, what those different components did. Those guys were just combat engineers, so they showed me stuff of blowing stuff up, and they just deployed. So I'm like, well, these guys do cool stuff. I'll go do that. And lo and behold, I joined the National Guard. I think it was in 2006, and yeah, that's how that came about.
It's you and I have very similar stories in that regard. When I left active duty, I got out. Brock and I, we were both stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. If you've never been there, that's kind of the armpit of the
Yeah,
United
for
States.
sure. I was in
It's
Yorktown for a while.
okay, so yeah, so
Yeah.
it's super rough area. My wife had moved out there after we got married, with our two daughters, and she is originally from here in Idaho, and she was just itching to get back. It was not a place to raise kids. So we had several long conversations about it, and I decided, okay, that's the best thing for the family. I went directly from active duty into the reserves. And is same thing. I got out. My father-in-law owns a construction company. I worked construction with him for a few months, and I think it was like my second or third drill weekend. I was talking to anybody I can about how do I deploy,
Yeah.
when's the next deployment. And I remember I came home and I told my wife, hey, there's this deployment that I could volunteer for. And she was livid. Um, it's just such a culture shock, and kind of playing to the mental health aspect of it. I think no matter what you do, you go from one morning you wake up and you're putting the uniform on and kind of going back to the patriotic small town feel. You're important, you're putting that uniform on, and then the next day you're driving back to your hometown or wherever, and you're just Joe Schmo who was in the military, and now you're work in construction or whatever. And that's not to speak poorly on anybody working in construction or anything like that. There's nothing bad with that. It is a major culture shock. And I know at least for me personally, the first couple months of getting out were rough. Mentally and mental health wise, it was weird, just a change in identity.
Yeah, I think your sense of purpose is questioned a lot, when you get out of uniform.
That's exactly it. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and it's funny because while you're you think about I don't know if you had a similar experience in the Coast Guard, but everybody complains. It's always how bad it is, or I don't want to go to work, or oh, I've got duty weekend, and everybody just bitches nonstop. And then you finally get out, and you're like, oh, now what? Like you're missing those people to commiserate with, and like you almost like miss being miserable. I don't know why that is, but like you really, that's taken from you. And maybe it's the sense of purpose, or I don't know what it is. I still kind of feel like I'm trying to figure out what that feeling is, but it's interesting being out and then not having that thing, even though you hate it.
Yeah. And, a lot of guys, that's just the politics. We all know what the military is in the organizations we've been in. So we all kind of have those feelings towards it. But yeah, there's definitely a love-hate relationship that pulls you back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you had quite a few search and rescue missions. Is that right? You've done several of them?
No, I mean, sortie wise, sure. But like actual cases that were like super hairy, just a couple.
Really?
Would you mind telling us about one or two of them?
I can think of a case where we got some prescription. A guy had gotten lost and I can't remember what his condition was, but he was stuck out in the intercoastal waterway. And we got him and got his medication to him. Been a couple cases where we pulled people out of water, had a gal die on me, doing CPR. Most of the other ones I was a part of that were like, there was serious injury or death were deaths, usually a bridge jumper, a drowning by the time we got there. But as far as like, kind of what you've seen on the movies and the heavy weather and stuff, I was never involved in any of that. We had some just not very rough seas where I was at on the East Coast. And so usually it was more of a negligence part on the people either operating the boat or whatever. Sometimes, weather, they still get heavy weather there and stuff, just not comparable to like the Northeast or the West Coast as far as heavy weather search and rescue, because that's what a lot of people think of.
Sure.
But,
sure.
Those are really the only big ones I can think of. We did a lot of law enforcement, a lot of fisheries, stuff like that too.
I think that one of the things that sounds the most interesting to me about the Coast Guard is you're directly hands-on involved with people that are not military. And
Right.
I think that exposure opens up a lot of doors because you're not, and maybe not good ones, but you're dealing with people that like don't understand the military lifestyle or whatever you want to call it. And it sounds like in a story like that where you're directly responsible for a non-military person's life, and they're hanging kind of in your hands. Do you feel kind of like an overwhelming responsibility? What is that like interacting with people in that setting?
That particular setting was pretty chaotic. It happened to be during, I believe it was spring break, and it was right off of St. Simon's Island. And on the backside of St. Simon's Island, I can't remember the name of it, but when you come across the causeway from Brunswick, Georgia, over the intercoastal waterway to get to St. Simon's Island, there's a boat pier and restaurant and a lot of stuff right down there. And we had taken the family out of the water, and the mother and father was in shock. We got them to the dock. Mother drowned on me while I was doing CPR, but that was more weird because it was like there were people around and people had stopped on the causeway, and there was like this big scene, right? But to me, it was just like this big fog of like getting, however, and I was the one doing the CPR, but like at first, when we first pulled up on scene to get people out of the water. And what's surprising is people that don't know how to swim that will go out on the ocean in a nothing boat or out in the water is crazy. But, the Coast Guard and the guys I was around, we all kind of took to it and did our thing. We got him to the dockets. Unfortunately, the mother passed away, but it's tough when you're dealing with civilians because they don't kind of understand too. Like my big beef, as I was having a hard time with the mom, I was getting her to vomit, but it was tough. And like I said, she ended up passing, but her kids were right there. And I was trying to get people to get the kids out. And my guys finally got the kids out of the way. And back by this time, I believe an ambulance had came and we finally got EMTs down there. But yeah, it was just really chaotic because it was like a kind of a, there's a restaurant there and people are pulling their sailboats in, and we pull up in this chaotic rush and just break everything up with that, pulling people off the boat. And so I think that was kind of a shock to the people around us. And then the situation was pretty hairy for us as well, just because of, having the kids and the husband in shock. And the kids were all fine. They had life jackets. The parents didn't.
You talk about it was kind of just like a fog while you're doing it. You mean kind of just like you're in this hyper focus. I'm doing my job and I'm not really, I guess I can't really pay attention to anything else that's going on around me, where you're just hyper focused in and you have kind of really no recollection of everything else going on in that situation.
Yeah, and it's like being in a situation to where like you're having to, everything seems shut out almost, and you're like having to remind yourself of the training and the steps, and getting the confidence to follow through. I think all that's going through your mind just 100 miles an hour. What do I do? What do I do? And then in any case, it's like when you're in a small team like that, someone has to be taking action somewhere with something. And like I said, I was around really good guys. And I think that just keeps the wheel turning for everyone, no matter who's.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was really the only bad case I ever did, as far as like craziness.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that situations like that are very reminiscent of, you spend so much time training. It seems like while you're in the military, you're rehashing the same, like, okay, I've been to CPR class like 100 times. I don't need to know it again. Or like you're studying, you're getting qualifications that say you can do all these things. But it's in moments like that where it really matters, where all of that just kind of like fades away and you can like go to work and put everything that you've been practicing in when at a time when it matters. And I feel like a lot of people wait for that, and a lot of people don't get it. Ideally, you don't want to, but it's more of a readiness thing. You need to be ready to do that when the time comes. So that's interesting to hear somebody like on the ground dealing with that and putting that training to work. If you don't mind me asking, obviously dealing with losing somebody like that has got to be difficult. How do you deal with that? Is that something that you still kind of carry and hold on to? What was that like after the fact? Is that something that you thought about a lot or dealt with? Can you kind of share about that?
Sure. I don't carry it anymore, but I was young. I must have been 21, 22
Wow.
maybe. And
That's young to be dealing with something like that.
Yeah, my
absolutely.
senior chief I look back and I talked to my wife about this. I was like, my senior chief knew something, right? Because he had called me, and I actually had got a chance to go to the hospital. I wanted to see if they were able to revive her, and like I said, she didn't live. Even knowing, if you're to the point you're doing CPR on someone after drowning, the chances are real slim. There's a chance though, right? So like, there was a couple things I was dealing with. The fact she died in front of her kids, and then we all joined to be the hero, especially in the Coast Guard. Like that's the situation you want. There's people around, you're getting an opportunity to save someone's life, and it just doesn't happen. And so you do carry that weight. And, my senior chief I look back now, he was wiser than me, Sesta. He knew something was up, and I think he had obviously lived through that a few times. We called him an old salty dog, but, he was pretty concerned about me, but I was young with a pretty big ego and one of the, little rock stars at the unit. So I'm good. I shook but no, it did affect me for a long time. And as you read in some of my stuff, I self-medicated with alcohol. throughout my life. And so that was one of the situations I would self-medicate with.
Is that something that was the beginning with alcohol and using that to self-medicate? Is that something that started while you were in the military, or something that you took on before you joined?
No, I started about the time, I think I had my first drink maybe 13-ish, never really got into it. A few years later, I started doing it, and it was more of a like getting to party and hang out with your friends. And now I can actually talk to girls. I have some confidence, that type of thing, and that's kind of how that started. But as it was for me, I don't know about a lot of people. Alcohol is this thing where we use it to celebrate, and we also use it to mourn, and we use it when we've had a bad day sometimes, and we use it when we get a paychecks. And for some reason, we have this weird bond with alcohol and our emotions. And it took me a long time to figure out how I was using alcohol and in my emotions. And when I would drink, it was always something. It was celebration on the weekend. There's always an excuse. And that's why I tell guys it's real dangerous, because your emotion will take you to the drink every time. There's always a reason, whether it's bad or good.
I think that is all of that is so true. You really you'll justify it in any way that you need to. And I think that it's kind of exacerbated by military culture just as a whole. I know that to be true outside of the military, but I honestly feel like it's made worse by the military. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it definitely can be. And, I remember them trying to root it out when I got in, the old wedding downs and stuff like that, like they have in the Navy and the Coast Guard. They were starting to frown on that stuff, but it's alcoholism's rooted pretty deep in the ranks. I went in as a drinker, which probably wasn't a good thing. And like I said, when I started, emotionally it was, oh, I'm going to get to go party with my friends, or I get to do this. But like I said, there's always those situations that come up in life. Someone dies, someone this, and pretty soon, once you've used alcohol to cope with those bigger deals, those bigger emotions, it's easier to let it take over for controlling all your emotions. And so I think a lot of people, they pick up a drink because that's how they've solved a bad problem in the past, or a good feeling in the past. And so for me anyway.
You're pretty open about your alcohol abuse and stuff like that. When did you kind of realize, like, you had that epiphany of, okay, this is getting out of hand? I need to start thinking about being done with this at a young age.
Yeah, I've been arrested multiple times for DUI. Like like you guys kind of went through it, and hey, you've got this credential and this credential. All my life, man, I've screwed those up because of it. So like
Really?
for me, when I talk to guys now, and I just got my 6 years of sobriety October 17th. A lot
Wow.
of guys look at like I'm with them. I'm with them on the phone, and I'm with them emotionally and exactly where they're at, because they're like, I'm trying to tell them, like, listen, you have to separate yourself from your crowd, because, like you guys know, there's always your emotions there, but there's always going to be that reason. And when you're first in sobriety, I tell this guys all the time, because I went through it. To look at 30 days is crazy. To look at and think, I'm not gonna. When you've drank since you're a teenager and been in the military and done all this shit, and now you're 30 something years old, and you've drank for 20 years, and it's how you deal with everything. And you look at a year, like you're stressed out about a wedding that's coming up. You're stressed out about this that's coming up. Like, how am I going to get through all this? And really, you don't have to worry about any of that. You just have to look at today. And if you can get through today, then tomorrow's tomorrow. But like that forecasting of failure, I did it. I tried. I couldn't tell you how many times I've tried to quit drinking in my life. Hundreds, hundreds.
Wow. It, it I know that you've talked about, you got several DUIs, and that's, it just kind of kept happening. And do you think that held you back in the military for
Oh yeah.
promotions and stuff like that? I would
Oh
assume,
yeah.
even back then. I know.
Well, my problem too was like with the Army, I was like in 2013 Soldier of the Year. I was a glory
Wow.
boy for the unit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes when you're the glory boy, stuff, you just get a slap on the hand. And yeah, it sucked because I disappointed a lot of my leadership with my actions, and that it played a big role on me too.
Well, and I think that goes to show like you have no idea what somebody's struggling with. They can be the all-star of the unit, like you say, and or you just see kind of the surface level of like, oh, this person's getting an award, this person's doing this, they're doing that. But unless you know them intimately, you're not going to know like, hey, this person's going home and they're drinking every night, or what kind of stuff they're struggling with, or whatnot. I there's nothing that hits a nail on the head more than that. I feel like with especially in the military culture.
Yeah, and that's really kind of where I got a DUI and ended up getting discharged. And I was looking at just what the hell happened, right? And in my life and this and that. And I went about a year. I had quit drinking. I was about 12 months sober. But when I got arrested, like I kind of knew what was going to happen, right? Like, okay, I got a divorce coming. I'm going to go bankrupt. I mean, every aspect of your life gets basically. So I lost my career, lost all that. And if I wouldn't have been sober for those 12 months when that divorce finally happened, it wasn't necessarily just the divorce. It was just a combination of everything. I was done, you know, and I didn't quit. And
Yeah.
when I didn't do it, I was really interested in figuring it out. And it really came down to at the time, like I couldn't do it because I was sober, as pussy as that sounds. And then I started thinking about, well, how many guys do I know that I've served with that have, shot themselves in a fucked up way?
Just sorry to cut you off. When you say I didn't do it, you mean commit suicide?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had decided to hang myself in my garage, and
Okay.
I had a really bad day, and I just picked up the phone, called the right person, and it didn't happen. And I really credit being sober from alcohol, because I think about, like, if I would have had that day and been drunk, all bets are off. And then I started thinking about how many guys do I know that have started a shotgun under the influence. It's quite a bit. And this is
Yeah.
when the Shot at Dawn project started to kind of be born. And I got really interested in trying to fix myself. And I got really interested in the veteran suicide problem. And I'm not like naive to the fact that I'm not the typical, like, I think a lot of times when people think of veteran suicide, right, they're thinking of someone that deployed to Afghanistan and got blown up 3 times and this and that. And that happens. And we got a lot of combat vets that struggle, and but there's a percentage of our overall stats which are massive, and they're a smaller part of that percentage. So I think there's this kind of misconception out of the gate with veteran suicide. And as you were talking about kind of at the unit level, I really wanted to figure out what the hell we could do at the unit level, right? Because when I started looking at the veteran suicide problem, the first thing I said to myself is, we're looking at everyone else as vets, right? This is Congress. This is the Department of Defense. This is the Pentagon. This is their problem. Why aren't they fixing it, right? This is the VA. And I thought, well, what if we took it at a command level and look at this problem? How can we fix it? And I don't know if you know this, but Shot at Dawn is historically significant. That's from World War I, where British commanders executed 309 soldiers for desertion and other things. What really happened is the men had severe shell shock and extreme battle fatigue. And they said they'd gone mad, this, that, and the other thing. But before those men were shot, they went through a legal process. And that's when the idea of the Shot at Dawn project kind of was created at the command level for me. And I saw a hole in our system, our non-judicial punishment system and our counseling system. And that's when I developed the form for commanders and a suicide officer for better evaluation when someone gets flagged under one of those 8 layers, i.e. shows up to formation drunk, right? his line leader doesn't just, even in a more extreme case, let's say they're going to do an NJP on him. During that NJP process, they could use this form to evaluate, just like you're saying. A lot of times, hey, this guy got, peed dirty on dope. He did this, he did that. So he goes in, he gets his dope counseling, he gets his rank tanking, he gets a little pay taken, and then we're off to the next one, right? This forces the command to go over the reasons I believe veterans and military members take their lives. So going over each layer with the suicide officer and giving us a chance to flag those members early on in ranks. And I think that we can squash a lot of these at the command level. And again, we talk about veteran suicide. It's an active duty problem. And these guys come from active duty in the National Guard and the Army Reserve and the Naval Reserve. And I say this all the time. The facility I designed that I know could work, we could put every homeless vet in it now and have 100% stat saving them. And we wouldn't be doing ourselves any favors because we got a fresh crop coming through the next day. Until we start facing this problem and fighting this problem from conception, which is boot camp, and how we address these 8 layers throughout a military member's career, I don't know that we're really ever going to fix this. So, that's where I'm fighting athletically to kind of get my, and I just now started, I've been on a break from doing any of this stuff really for about a year, except for the athletics side. The media sides now, I want to talk a little bit more about, what we've developed and what we've donated to the federal government and what I believe will come to fruition. And, I 100% believe this is beatable. 100% believe I've created a full solution. And as we've seen with these recent bills, there's no doubt in my mind they could afford to build one, possibly 50, as far as facilities for vets. And there's just so much, I think, offensively that we can do that we're not doing. And so I'm excited to bring that new perspective to veteran suicide, because it's a stuck in the mud perspective every time I'm online. And with the, those active duty stats coming out, it's absurd. We cannot sustain that, our military.
You're absolutely right. What you gave us a little bit of a history lesson and talking about how long this has been going on. Like, this is something that goes back to our military's inception, likely in one way or another. And we're maybe a little bit more privy to the problem now and more sensitive, like you said, to active duty folks, people coming back from deployment, this and that, all very important stuff. But in your opinion, why hasn't it improved? We have all of this training. I probably sat through 100 different suicide prevention trainings in my 4 years in the military, at least. And my last year that I was in the Navy, we lost 7 people to suicide on my boat alone. 7 people. And what's the problem? Are they just looking at the wrong things? They obviously know it's a problem. They wouldn't be putting us through the trainings without it. What's the issue? What's the disconnect?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of disconnect. Excuse me. First off, we have to look at the social demographic we're recruiting from, right? Like, who's jumping in line to get $20,000 to get their legs blown off in Iraq? Someone that's never had $20,000 before, right? Yeah. We're, they first off, and it's not uncommon for a high-ranking officer to X himself. This is full scale with this, but just like with Vietnam, the guys that picked up the weight there, we're talking about the lower class of society. Most of us are blue collar, right? We come from a lower monetarily demographic. And when you're looking at social demographics, I know there were a lot of guys in my unit, man, that they had nothing growing up, and they were in the National Guard with nothing. And you've got a higher probability of alcoholism in the family, all these different things. And then you get them in service, whether you give them bonus money, you pull them away from home, and they bring in any of those ailments, whether it's alcoholism, and they pick it up in ranks, however they pick it up, the morale on any boat, all of that's going to play a factor. But the core of this comes down to our military members. And I'll ask you this, you guys and I'm asking you a cold since you both served, how much of your paycheck would you be willing to bet? Right. And I'll give you like, so for example, alcoholism, financial loss, and divorce, right? Relationship issues, sexual assault, right? Think about how many guys, those seven, out of those seven guys, how many of them had an incident related to one of those pharmaceutical drugs throughout, as simple as the counseling?
If I had to bet, I would say probably all of them, all seven of them, I would think, or at least 5 out of 7.
How
What
many
do
you
you
think
think?
would actually have NJP action?
These are good. And I don't know the answers to those
It's the
questions,
government.
but like
That's my,
I
that's my
think you're hitting
question to
on.
the government. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like how many?
So
What's
you're
the
pointing
cost?
out that those signs, like getting flagged for, hey, this person
Absolutely.
got a DUI or whatever, those should be triggers. Like, hey, we need to be looking at these people
Well,
more, and we need to be.
we gotta look at, okay, so in my case, in a lot of guys' cases, we gotta look at kind of the situation of when they pulled the trigger. So, if a guy's broke, I like to say this, like if I'm a commanding officer, right, and I get Joe Schmo in here and he just got let's say a DUI, and he comes in and gives me the song and dance, and we're going to make him do his counseling, and he's going to do his civilian legal stuff he's got to get handled. We're going to drop his rank. We're going to do this, that, and the other thing. And then I send him on his way. I only know that he's got a drinking problem, right? And maybe 5, 6 days later, he pulls the trigger on himself. You know, did I have an opportunity to talk to him about what his finances were like? If he had
absolutely.
$600 in his account as opposed to minus $600, could have that saved his life that day? I'd like to say little things like that we'll never truly know the answer to, but I'd like to think we have a shot, right? And
Yeah,
another thing that could carry on from this is if we're attacking these, right? If you're getting a guy that's 19 and wet behind the ears and he's from a rough family and he joined the infantry or he joined the combat engineers or he joined the Navy for that bonus money, and or college money, whatever his reason, and he takes one of those issues in service, you've got an opportunity there when he flags himself. You're already going to go through a legal process with him, whether it's just a line leader counseling him. We know once ink hits the paper on a service member, it has to fall. Those situations, it has to fall under the commander's authority, right? The Uniform Code of Military Justice, that those levels of non-judicial punishment, all the way up to court martial, all the way down to a counseling. Are we missing an opportunity there to better evaluate these guys and get them help? Because you and I, all of us know, even for active duty and reserve, man, they put it, you need help with something and you go to a line leader, that's one of the first things. Sure, there's some frowning on it, but there's resources out there, from financial aid. If a guy's going through a divorce and comes up short on some bills, from medical stuff, if something's TRICARE's not going to, I will say this, a lot of units have great support as far as like, it's just not getting put to use necessarily.
Well, and I think I think you hit on this a little bit. When people get in trouble or something happens, one of those flags goes off. And if it comes down to getting an NJP or whatever it is, that whole experience it's so transactional. It's, hey, you lost rank and here's half month's pay times 2. Like, and then they do their time, and at least on the boat you go to restriction for 60 days, maybe you sweep a couple extra floors, and then you're reformed after that,
Yeah.
quote unquote. Like that's the end of it. And I think what you're pointing out here is that the buck doesn't stop there. Like
Yeah.
that should be a sign that, hey, this person, we need to spend some more time with this person and be looking for more there.
I think
Yeah.
it really comes down to just caring. Like you're saying, somebody gets a DUI, it's exactly right. It's just transactional. Where if your CO or XO or whoever just cared to look into it a little bit more, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. You could save countless service members by just caring and looking a little bit further into it. And Brock, you were talking about in our 4 years, we probably went through 100 suicide prevention trainings. And when I think back to those, everybody's just, Okay, another training. It's just a band-aid. It's just a check in the box. It's not actually a solution. Nobody's ever taking that stuff seriously.
Until the Department of Defense and the Pentagon's willing to look at why service members are taking their lives and then correcting those situations in ranks and trying to correct those situations in ranks before they get out of ranks, what are they doing?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Well,
I
and
think
wasting their time and a
Uh,
lot
I
of money.
think I think if you were to put a process into place where something like that does happen, and okay, now the process isn't just go NJP, here's your demotion, here's your punishment, do this, this, and this. If you put a process into place where it was kind of okay, you're gonna have to get a punishment, but also let's you as the CO or the commander or whoever's in charge there, you have to look into this sailor and that kind of thing, and kind of forcing their hand almost.
Yeah, and at what level can we use this at, from medical discharge boards to generalized discharge boards, right? Like, if you really want to send service members off on the right foot, you should probably check these boxes if you don't want them. But hey, we'll see where this fight leads us. But I'm confident that we've got something here, and to hear you guys say it's really 100% when I ask someone like, and it doesn't really matter what branch because we've all been there. As far as like, hey, if I told you this many layers, like, and these are three of them, how many guys out of it would have been affected by those 3 or 4 layers at one point in their career where it was noticeable and talked about and put on paper at one point? Even if it's from an E5 to put it on paper as the first line leader or the first petty officer in front of that E3 or whatever. Like, was anything taken? Because if it was, are we missing something there? And we definitely are. And our commanders in service, are highly educated. They have the legal authority out in the field to take our lives, literally.
Yeah.
Let's give them a little, and I think they'll welcome it with open arms, to give them a little power as far as like better serving this. And you don't have to be a psychiatrist to mark. And my form is real rudimentary, but it's built for rock throwers. Like, there's no need to overthink this as far as, if a guy's struggling financially or not, or if he's, how many of our females that are taking their lives have had a sexual assault on their record? I think the percentage is over, I'd have to relook. It's high. It's like, I think it's over 90.
I would assume it would be very high. That
So,
sexual assault in the military, that alone that's another major issue. I mean, Brock, I'm sure you and I know how many girls that have unfortunately had some sort of sexual assault while during their time in the military, and that alone. One is a separate issue that needs to really be cracked down on, but it's also just absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, I was just going to say, if you, I think from what I can remember from a lot of the trainings that we did, especially when it comes to suicide, and then as we're talking about here, sexual assault, a lot of the training revolves around saying something and finding ways to be comfortable to have that conversation and saying, hey, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Hey, has somebody said or done something to you? And like being, just even broaching the subject is the hard part, that at least that the military is like training the people. I mean, Tim and I got out in 2018. That's like what they are telling us about, like how to have those conversations. Like you're saying, it needs to be something more, because it's really not working. Before we started recording, you were talking about some of the numbers that the Pentagon just released. Do you want to walk us through some of those numbers, and then maybe walk us through these 8 layers that you're talking about, so that we can kind of hear about those?
Well, they just released the stats that this quarter their suicide rates have gone up 46%. So that's insane. Since Vietnam, there's been over 300,000. And not to backtrack here, but I did want to say, as far as just the military and what we're talking about, and what they could do and what the Pentagon do, I also like to talk about kind of like what we can do. And that's where I'm hopeful that, like, just on my story and what I'm doing, like, other guys can look at that like, hey, you can quit drinking. A lot of this comes down to the pills and the booze. We all know that. And that's ultimately on us, whether the VA's over prescribing dudes, which they are, and not helping the cause or not. All these substances really at the end of the day come down to us. And so I think it's important for vets that have struggled, no matter what your background, no matter your whatever, if you've struggled with suicide and you're a vet and you're doing things good, like that's how we, the little tools I learned from you are going to help keep me, sane. I say that, like, we'll learn from each other too in this recovery phase and this and what we're doing for, and for me it's not going to be for everyone, but the running and the exercise and the hold myself accountable and challenging myself, all that helps me. And so I hope other guys see that and hey, I'll try that out. Maybe not my lane, but and the same with the the alcohol or whatever guys vices are. Like, I think it's important that vets are leading this charge too.
Yeah, I think that it really comes down to we all have to be doing something, and not only just saying something, but being there for other people. And I think that one of the reasons why we're doing this is creating and establishing a veterans network where we can talk to people and open up these conversations and be willing to have the conversations that other people aren't willing to. And we're really thankful to have you on the show here to talk about that today. You have been working to kind of raise awareness with these ultra marathons, all of this crazy running and competitions and stuff. I highlighted a little bit of those at the beginning. What kind of got you into doing that? We talked a little bit earlier about your prior interest in physical fitness and your desire, but you said that this is kind of more of a recent thing. Is it purely an awareness thing, or?
Well, back in the fall of it would have been 2019, I noticed the guy got national news for, I think he had ruck marched 100 miles, something like that. And he was raising money for a nonprofit that was, doing whatever. Those things, they do a lot of great stuff for families of suicide victims and stuff like that. So when they raise that money, it goes to a lot of good places. But I'm like, if he's doing that for that, and I've created all this, which is a different lane, what can I do to challenge myself? That's when I came up with the 200-mile run from, it ended up being Lancaster to Las Vegas, 210 miles. We couldn't launch out of LA because of the traffic and stuff like that. But so I wanted to challenge myself and do something no one thought I could do, and was able to do that run. But it didn't get much attention or anything like that. It was right before COVID. But I don't think it was really meant to. I think it was kind of the beginning of the path I would begin to take. And really, I started to do that to get attention on what I created. And then when I got into it, I realized the growth that can be with that, right? And like, hey, maybe this is not only my calling, but if I'm gonna get to the level I need to get out with my background, the respect among the people I need to get, like, I'll become one of the baddest men on the planet. I can do it and help get this. And it's become, I'm kind of the project in a sense. I've become the project. And so yeah, just if that kind of explains it, I'm just doing it to get the opportunities to speak on this. Exactly.
That's definitely.
And I've held off this last year. Obviously, the Moab 240 didn't work out. I got injured, but I'll be back next year. But yeah, I've just been waiting to talk a little bit about this. We've got pieces in the right place, and eventually, I'm confident we'll get it kicked off.
Do you think that you have to do this because, or like, do you feel like not taken seriously because of your background and like maybe things that you've done or getting a DUI or any of those things? Do you feel like people don't give you the credence because of that? And this is a way to reconcile that and show people that you're walking the talk, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that was one of the factors when I began. Yeah, it was definitely like, hey, no one wants to take me seriously because of my background. Like, I firmly believe with what I've created, I know this, if I was someone else, I would already be a glory boy. But I'm glad that it's gone down like this. I really am, because it's I don't really take much weight in that anymore. It's become like real personal to me, and like my relationship with God. I think that He helped have a hand in me creating this, and I'm no perfect dude. I never claimed to be. But just really pushing myself now to become a better man in all aspects. And, I do want to prove people wrong. That's a big part of this, but it doesn't drive me anymore. It's a fun chip to have on my shoulder. What drives me is I think that this can save lives, and I'm dumbfounded about how bad the problem's gotten and their lack of giving a shit, frankly, to put it in other words. And so, what I thought was a disadvantage, people not believing in me and or not wanting to give me opportunities because of my background, I think ultimately has been an advantage because it's helped make me grind harder and think of, and when you do that stuff, it's and get more uncomfortable, I think there's growth there. So just like with the Moab 240, I built my whole year around that. Not everything else I did. It was all about the Moab 240 at the end of the day. And so to go down there and get injured when I was running like I was running was pretty heartbreaking. But that left me pretty quickly, and I'm right back up, ready to go next year. And just like, hey, I'm not on my clock here. It's not my time yet. I'll just keep digging, and eventually I'll dig through.
And this was for those that don't know, the Moab 240 is I'm assuming a 240-mile race.
Yeah, 240-mile ultra race run. Yeah, one of the most extreme in the world. It's pretty intense.
And you were placed pretty high at the time when you took an injury, correct?
Yeah, I think I was in fifth when I first rolled my ankle, and then had gone back a couple spots, and I went down the third time. I think I was only 23 miles in roughly of the 240-mile race, but so I didn't get to experience much of it, but what I did experience of it, it's a very technical course. The baddest people in the world run. These guys are insane. But yeah, they run those La Cruz Mountains, 240 miles around the most extreme environment you can imagine. And I think the guy that won it this year ran it in 55 hours. So they do it with little to no sleep.
I saw a little bit of it on your Instagram. You had twisted your ankle once, kept running, twisted it again, kept running. You did it 3 times, right? Before you were like, I can't, like, I'm going to really put myself out potentially for good.
Yeah, the third time I'd rolled it, it was real painful and it popped.
Oh,
Swollen up. And by that time, just to move, I was using my poles as crutches.
yeah.
And so I knew I was cooked, basically. When you got
As,
2
yeah.
10 to go or whatever it is, and that type of terrain, it's like, okay, next time I go, and then I was going down, and like when I'd roll it, I would fall. I was going down in like, wet, slick rock, just canyonous, pretty bad terrain. So, we had to pack it in and save it for next year. But like I said, it's cool because I got to go down there. I got to compete a little bit. I was in the top 10. I was hanging. I saw what it takes. So next year I'll return stronger.
As somebody who I don't run unless I'm being chased, and it better be something really big chasing me. That is like unimaginable to me to be like, yep, I'm gonna go run 210 miles. Like that just blows my mind. And then have the mental fortitude, the physical strength, the mental strength to hurt yourself not once but 3 times before you finally were like, yeah, I can't, so that obviously you can do it again next year. That blows me away. And I think that it really speaks on getting the exposure for Shot at Dawn project. And it's a really, really cool concept, and I can really appreciate it.
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What do you I kind of just have like some general questions about your running and stuff. Just how do you do that anyway? Like that, how do you train and say, hey, I'm gonna go run 240 miles? What is the preparation like for that? What's going through your head leading up to that? Kind of walk us through the lead up to trying to tackle that big of a problem.
I'll revert back to my 210. I just started running 10-mile legs in the morning and 10 at night. reading some stuff on recovery, how to keep your legs, because like anyone else, I run, man, my legs will cramp up. I can't hardly walk. Um, Learned a few tricks, and I did that Las Vegas run and came back and, trying to rediscover how to really do the Moab 240 and do it well. And that's why this year I put a lot of different challenges before it, not only for those, but to help me train up for it. Yeah, it's just one step at a time, 1 mile at a time. I tell my wife this, like there's days and weeks and months where every run when I start out is a little miserable. I have days where it's like, I'm going to go take off and I'm stoked. Like right now, I want my ankle to heal. I miss running. So like my first week back, I'm going to be super happy. But like, for the most part, you got to get through that mental thing of like, this is going to suck. And when you do that on the first mile, day one, and you can start doing that consistently, that 240 miles, those longer things don't become so unfathomable. But yeah, I mean, doubt is part of this. Failure is part of it. The Ironman, I got one in 5 hours and 34 minutes, but I failed twice before that. There's been a lot of that. There's been a lot of like getting injured. It doesn't work out, right? It never does how you plan it. But, I've learned in this process, like getting those credentials is great, but you got to be willing to go down and fight for them, because you're not going to get them the first time every time when you're in this ultra world or this highly, I guess, your endurance world with triathletes and stuff like this. You're going to fail, but that's what's great about this. It gives you the opportunity to come back. And I think that's a catalyst with everything in life, and one of those things. So, yeah, just preparing for the Moab 240. Yeah, it was. I was stoked. I was ready. I did that Cam Hanes week to help prepare for it. But I pretty much in the last year, I'd have to pull up my miles, but I 50 a week.
I
That's
don't think I've ran
insane.
50 miles in my lifetime.
Yeah, 50 miles a week. You can probably run 200 miles. You're just going to have to train a little different. But it's
Tim's
just,
maybe run 5 miles in his life, and all 5 were in the Navy for PT tests.
yeah. So
That is true.
even him, you never know. But yeah, a lot of guys want to know how, and I don't know how to say how. I just know that like the fear of failure and the fear of actually getting out and going and doing it, I have that. And I have the anxiety on just going out and doing a 5 mile run a lot of days and then not wanting to do it.
Really?
Same.
Oh
Same.
yeah, fuck. Like you don't even know. Like there'll be days I would rather go to the dentist than run a half a mile, let alone multiple miles. You know what I mean? Do anything.
Why is that? Knowing that you've literally run 210 miles almost straight, but how does doing a smaller run doesn't make that it's still that big of a deal every time?
I mean, sure, you can look at something and go, "Oh, I've ran this length before, so this is nothing," or "I've done 100 miles before, so a marathon is nothing." But, and that's true in a sense, but you know, it's stepping up to the plate each time with a new pitcher, right? It's that same feeling. It's it's hard to get off the couch some days. It's hard to stay motivated, and the only thing that gets you past like motivation is, they say it's a lot of guys say it ain't real, and in a sense they're right, because it's only going to get you so far. It's that discipline, and running is I find a lot of peace in running. I find a lot of grace in running, but the first 2 miles of every run sucks donkey dick for me. Like, frankly, it's just like a lot of like, oh, I'm not warmed up yet. This sucks. And once I get going and my head's in the right spot, I'm cool. But yeah, man, I'm nothing special when it comes to running. I don't like doing it necessarily all the time, and going out and starting is the hardest part. And so I tell people, if you take the first step, you can run 240 miles, because it's literally what it was for me. It's an everyday grind of, am I going to run today? Am I going to do this? or am I not? And I had that day today. Like, even though I'm not supposed to really be running quite yet, like I wanted to do a 5K and I got up to super early this morning and I was like, fuck that. My ankle's not 100% yet, but like
Yeah.
I also wanted to get it loose and I know it'll help in my recovery if I just go get it stretched a little bit. And, I kind of wanted to see where I'm at. So, I got it done and I felt way better and it wasn't that bad. But man, getting my shoes on this morning was a fucking nightmare. Yeah. And I've had a great year in athletics and that's just a 5K. So I tell guys like, you could do it because I fight my bitch ass every day. I quit fighting the outside world and I started fighting the bitch in me. And that's when I started improving.
Well, and
Stop.
that's such an anecdote that applies to so much in life, just that the first step is always the hardest of like starting something new, or even something like you're obviously a phenomenal runner, but to hear that you struggle with taking that first step is, I think it's encouraging. And eh, a lot of people can take solace in the fact that whatever it is that they're fighting at this point, maybe it's trouble with alcohol, maybe it's thoughts of suicide, maybe it's running, maybe other people are running the Moab 240 this next year with you. I think that that first step is the most important, and kind of reverting back to your training after that.
Yeah, and it's not always going to be smooth when you get into this. I tell guys that isn't at all. But the Moab 240, by the time I got there, I had gone through so much this year in failure and getting up to the gate and lining up with people and the Ironmans and doing this and doing that. A lot of those nerves were gone. But I knew that, like, in order for me to be comfortable, I needed to be running. I needed to get out there and start competing, because once I'm doing that, you forget about all the bullshit, all those fears and all the anxiety kind of goes away and you're like, okay, I'm cool. But yeah, that's all that stuff makes me uncomfortable. Going to a race, meeting new people, lining up, all of it. But like it's been super good for me, and it's made it, like, just like I said, it gets easier, but the work necessarily doesn't. The
Yeah.
work's always the work.
Just to kind of to wrap things up, if we try to ask a couple questions here at the end, what advice would you give to somebody that's maybe in or out currently, that's maybe struggling with maybe alcohol abuse, maybe pills, maybe whatever it is? What would you say? What would people want to hear?
I think there's a lot of things that could be said here, but let me just go back to something that maybe they don't want to hear, something that I should have heard. Is like, I think a lot of times when we're stuck in the grips of alcoholism or pill abuse or anything, we like to look to the left and look to the right. And I'd like to tell those people to look in the mirror and just ask yourself, do you like the way your life's going right now? Are you happy with where you're at? And if you're not, I would consider putting that drink or that pill down, because I think most of us, when we're doing that to ourselves, are self aware of it. At least I was. And I didn't want to be a drunk and I didn't want to be this or that, but I was just powerless as far as like actually giving it up. And so it took a lot of failure. It took handcuffs. It took the bashing of my ego for me to get to open my eyes. And I would tell anyone, don't be me. Catch that on before you got legal problems. Catch it before you have all this, and give yourself a fighting chance. But until you're willing to look in the mirror, because, I've met a lot of alcoholics and we've all got our story, right? And I've met a lot of drug addicts and they all got their story. Some of us had this or that. A lot of people in life get a bad handshake. At the end of the day, no one gives a shit. The only one that's going to keep that drink or drug out of your mouth is you. And the stories of what put it there, no one gives a shit anymore. And so, and unless you're willing to pull that reality in, you'll struggle with it for a long time. But if you can pull that reality in, that no one gives a shit about your ailments and you're the one that needs to give a shit about them, and you're the one that can fix them and stand up and fix them, and you have the abilities. Like, I tell guys this a lot when they're playing poor me on the phone, like, fuck dude, you were a Marine. How did you feel when you went to boot camp and get graduated that day? Like, who are you now? Like, sometimes we just got to strap our boots up and go. And that's who we're dealing with. So I tell them that, like, you want to quit drinking. You're tired of having a shitty marriage. You're tired of this. You're tired of being broke. Okay, fix it. look in the mirror and fix it. And that's the advice I would give them. I don't know if they'd want to hear it because I don't know the situation, but
Wow.
Sometimes the hardest pill to swallow is the best one.
yeah.
Well, with that, where can people go to follow along with what you're doing at Shot at Dawn?
Just at Conrad Jeffries on Instagram. Kind of leads to everything else. So yeah, just CONRADJEFFRIS on Instagram.
And then your website, shotatdawnproject.org. You can follow along there as well.
Yeah.
Conrad, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you guys have a blessed day. And I learned, so that's always good because I got to go throw some rocks. You know how I am.
We're here to learn.
Heck yeah. Thanks, man.
Right on, guys. Later.
See ya.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.